Hey, I'm Sid. I'm a CEO and co-founder at GitLab, and I'm together with Asim. Asim, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, I'm Asim. I'm the founder of Micro, and just here, chatting with Sid.
Yeah, we might go into a range of topics. We both care a lot about Kubernetes, cloud native frameworks to get you bootstrapped there. Uh, we're probably going to talk a bit about Y Combinator. And last time we talked about open source monetization. So we might go in there today, but we'll see. We'll see where the conversation today leads us. But I think you had a first question.
Yeah. So my question really goes back to the kind of early days of GitLab. I wanted to kind of understand, where were you? What was the state of GitLab pre YC? What made you? And what made you apply to YC? And then what did you actually get out of that?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we did YC when we were 9 people. So we had 2 people in sales. All rest of us were kind of developing, and I was the CEO and did everything else. We joined. We got an offer to purchase the company for $10 million in 2014, and we were like, it's clear that's not what we want, and that would. Like I live in the Netherlands, to meet you in the Ukraine, we would have been set for life. So that wasn't the goal. And then in 2014, we had a customer, our first customer, cancel. And we immediately responded with, oh, what is the feature you're missing? Because we'll add it and we want you back. And that worked a few times before, but they said, no, there's an order from headquarters. We're all going to use GitHub. We're like, that makes sense. That all the people paying us money are all large companies, and if we're not actively selling it to them and they don't standardize on GitLab, they're going to standardize on something else.
Yeah.
So we needed to up our game, and we've always been a fan of Y Combinator, so we applied there and got into the winter 15 batch.
Interesting. And so, I mean, you're 9 people before you joined. What did revenue look like? How did you get to that phase?
Yeah, what we had was usage, but not a lot of revenue. I think we have our YC application out there somewhere. I'm not sure, but the revenue wasn't a lot. It was enough to sustain those 9 people, and we were all living on low salaries. So for sure, it was less than $1 million a year. Yeah. What it did for us were a couple of things. It sets your ambition level. When we joined, it was like there's 113 companies in this room. 3 of you will be $1 billion company. And if we knew which 3, we would have 3 companies in this room. So it's like, don't come to Silicon Valley to build something small. Come there to build something big.
Yeah.
Another thing was we said, oh, we want to grow 10% every 2 weeks. They're like, or 10%. I think, yeah, 10% every 2 weeks. And they were like, no, you should go 20% every 2 weeks. So they were encouraged to aim higher. Mm-hmm. The biggest thing was our peers. We had a roundtable every 2 weeks, and it's with your mentors. And we had Kevin and Kazar, and they asked you had to answer 3 questions. What does your company do? What did you accomplish of the things you set out to accomplish 2 weeks ago? And what are your plans for the next 2 weeks? And this was the second roundtable. I kind of fumbled on all 3 of them. And after me was Liz Wessels from then called Campus Job, now called Way Up. And she nailed them. They knew what they were doing. They knew they've done so much since the 2 weeks before, and they had really great plans for the 2 weeks ahead. And Kazari, looked at her and said, yes, that's exactly how it's done. And I couldn't help but imagine he was looking sideways my way a bit, like that's how it's not done. But it was clear we had to improve our pace. So me and Dimitri drove back. We had a huge car with just the two of us in front, back from YC to the house to tell the rest of the company what we learned that day. We're like, we got to up our game. So we came back and said, look, we got to go way faster. And we started iterating, just doing stuff. We had like 2 months, 3-month plans before. And that was, what can we do that will move the needle in 2 weeks? And that really worked. So now one of our company values is iteration. And it's all around the company. You'll find people trying to do minimum viable changes. Just do something to make an impact, but do it really fast.
It's an interesting point. It's something that's, I guess, lost on all of us the longer we go about building a product, which is the innovation really occurs at the early stages, and that whatever it is that you build solves a problem. It is a step change for users, and then you end up on this iterative path to slowly and incrementally improve that experience, and you sort of forget a little bit about, those innovative changes again, those things that make 10x improvements to a developer's life, or even a team's, life.
Since you were summarizing my version of it, I'll jump in a bit. But I think it's not so much about the kind of improvements you do. I think it's the speed at which you do them.
Right.
And it tends to be that if you grow bigger, you have to coordinate amongst more people. So the natural response is to slow down, make a bigger plan, so that when you coordinate a plan, you can go a longer. Since it takes a while to coordinate a plan, you can go for a longer time with that plan. And the appropriate response is to speed up, to bite off smaller things, and to push down more decision-making power to individual contributors. But that's very painful, because it's very painful to do something, a minimum viable change, because there's so much more you want to do and you're not shipping it. But we're doing stuff like that. For example, we shipped our first iteration of tracing, and we're going to implement Jaeger for that.
Oh, interesting.
To you. But our first iteration was a link to Jaeger. So you can now have a link in GitLab, and you click it and you go to Jaeger. That's the feature we shipped. That is embarrassingly little. And that is something we have to accept in our culture, that we're able to ship things that are so small and then still get them out and do the next thing and the next thing. And in a year, we'll have great Jaeger support and it will work with all our stuff. But you have to take it in really small steps, because if you take a small steps, it's super obvious where to go. So it's easier to do the coordination. You have to coordinate less, because it's so obvious where to go. It's hard to argue with it.
It's actually an interesting point, and I think it kind of buys into this other interesting point, which is companies that end up raising significant amounts of money almost feel like they have to change the way they exist to the external world and to their customers and everything else. It's almost like every product must be polished before it ships, which means you end up shipping, I don't know, a year later, 2 years later. Whereas if you, as you did with the Jaeger, ship a link, literally a link, that iterative MVP kind of model is the thing that lets you beat your competitors to market.
Yeah, in the words of Nat Friedman, the current CEO of GitHub, we have a culture of a low level of shame for what we ship. But we ship it really, really fast. And that's what you'll see if you look at our monthly release post. You'll see a whole bunch of tiny features.
Yeah.
The amount of them is amazing. I've never seen something like we ship in a month what other people ship in a year.
It's a good point. I mean, it speaks to what I'm doing right now, which is I am trying to build an enterprise version of my open source software, an open core version. I'm not doing it in a silo or behind walls. I'm literally doing it in the open, feature by feature. and customers are already signing up even when it's not ready yet because they want it and they're demonstrating their need for it by signing up and actually paying for something that doesn't even exist yet, which is quite fascinating to me, and also very motivating, right? I think it's almost like you get an immediate feedback loop the quicker you're able to ship, which lets you iterate and put out a better product. The worst thing could be if you spent a year building it, ship it, and then you built the wrong thing or nobody wants it. It'd be a massive waste of time and cost.
Two things. Everything we shipped was always ready. Like even that link, you can use it. It's useful and it's tested and it's documented. So we're not shipping a vision or something like that. We do have a vision, but that's not, we're not say, it's not a car that's half complete. It's a skateboard. Yeah. I think always ship something that people can use, because one of the big advantages is that you can get feedback about it, but you only get feedback if it's actually usable.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a very good point.
And the other thing that I want to add for us, what we added were all features that customers actually asked for. So they asked for role-based access control and all the other things you can imagine, and we added those. So it was basically like, it was very customer-driven.
Oh, interesting. I want to just kind of step back a little bit and go back to, before YC, but actually much further, all the way back to the beginning, because I don't know how many different places I've been able to find this information, but, like when you started, what was the product in the beginning? How many people were there? Was it just you? What was the product? What did you ship? Like, what after you shipped it, how long was it before you got the first customer?
Yeah. So by that time I saw GitLab, it had 300 people contributed to it. It was a year old. And Dimitri was the person working most on it. It had 0 customers because it wasn't selling anything. And I saw it, I thought, well, this is going to be big. And I thought, well, the future is software as a service, like Salesforce. So I did a show Hacker News. Hey, does someone want to use GitLab.com, GitLab as a service? And it didn't trend. And I went downstairs in this house to bake pancakes and checked Hacker News one more time, and I was on the homepage. So I went up. My girlfriend, now wife, finished the pancakes and brought them up to me because I was busy answering that. And a couple of 100 people signed up for the beta, like 450 in total. And I thought I'm onto something. So I tried that. But at the end of the year, I learned 2 things. First one was that nobody wanted to pay for it. All the people that want to pay for a SaaS version were on GitHub.
Right.
And that my inbox was filling up with really amazing companies that were running GitLab internally and needed more features.
Right.
At that time, I looked at Twitter and I saw Dimitri tweeting out to the world, I want to work on GitLab full-time. I thought that was pretty brazen, like he was full-time employed and you say like, yeah, basically I want to do something else. But I fired off an email like, okay, how much do you want to earn? And he named the number. And I went to the local Western Union money order station and transferred the money. And they asked like, hey, are you sure you want to wire money from the Netherlands to the Ukraine? Because there's lots of scams. Do you know this person, or is this someone you met over the internet? And at that time, my mental image of Dimitri was a mob boss from GTA in a pink suit, because that was his avatar everywhere. But I still decided to wire the funds, and the commits I asked for started landing in GitLab, so I know it was for real.
Yeah.
And that's how we got started, and we tried all kinds of models. First, we tried to enhance donations. We were doing donations at the time, and it went from ice cream money, which was, it bought him and his wife an ice cream every month, to $1,000 in the highest month, but still wouldn't pay for us. We tried paid development, which was very painful to coordinate the companies. if you had multiple companies wanting the same feature, as soon as there was an additional company, the first company built out and waited for the other one to build it. There were all these contracts preventing them from kind of paying by the hour to people. Like they had their preferred programmers and stuff like that. So we tried support, but people canceled support after a year because they didn't need it, because the software worked okay, and if it didn't work, we'd fix it anyway for you. So there's some perverse incentive if you pay for support, because you basically make the open source version crappy, so people have to pay you. So we didn't want to go to that route.
Yeah. And
we ended up building these features that customers asked for, not the individual contributors, but the managers and people like that, and putting them in a paid version, and that worked very, very well.
And so what was the time frame between you starting on that and then having this paid for version that you were selling?
I don't remember exactly when we did that. I think we did it. So 2013 was probably when I sent Dimitri his first paycheck, was probably halfway the year. So at a certain point we did Enterprise Edition. I think it's 13 or 14. And up to that time, I paid for the company by some savings I had. I speculated a bit in Bitcoin, and I doubled my savings. And I was also working full-time. Right. So the main person working on GitLab was Mladen Jankovski, right, a Serbian guy who was like employee number one. And I kind of worked full-time to pay him to work on GitLab full-time.
Interesting. That's, I mean, talk about bootstrapping. That's really like getting it off the ground. Some of your stories speak to me. I started out basically zero money. Instead of continuing my job, I quit my job. I spent 10 or 11 months building the software. Got the interest of a friend who was working at a German enterprise company who needed software. They ended up sponsoring the project. So that was my first sponsor and the thing that has kept me going for the most time. I tried getting other sponsored. I tried Patreon donations. The model doesn't really scale. It just doesn't scale at all, I think. And then I think, after a while, having tried a few different things, I think the open core enterprise version to me seems like the most logical step. Companies, they want to run this software themselves. They want certain features, which either they have to end up building themselves or you build it for them and they'll pay for it. And for me, that's the logical next step. I mean, when you had that paid for, the enterprise version out there, how many customers did you initially have?
Yeah, started with 0, obviously. I remember selling a Fortune 10 company on the software, and they want an enterprise-wide license, and the company has over 100,000 people. And I sold it at $1,500 a year, which was a big mistake on my part. But we did get the order, and they were super useful. They asked for a whole lot of very necessary features. Right. So we spent like 2 years making the features they wanted. But the great thing was other people wanted the same features, and they were very eloquent in explaining us what they needed. And we added that, and then people bought the subscription, and over time, they ended up paying like $300,000 a year or something. So also price-wise, we kept introducing higher tiers. So we never took a feature away from someone. Yeah. We ended up putting, as the value grew and kind of maxed out the existing price tier, we were able to introduce a new tier.
Yeah, and how do you feel about tiered pricing versus a single price point?
I think it's a no-brainer.
Really?
It's very hard to get a single price point right. And for us, the 3 different tiers are the 3 different buyers. So features aimed at managers are in the lowest tier. Features aimed at directors are in the middle tier. And features aimed at executives are at the highest tier.
Oh, interesting. And how long did it take you to get to like 10 customers?
I don't remember, but almost immediately.
Very interesting. And then kind of fast forward again, you know, through to your YC experience, you learned a significant amount there, you know, in terms of iteration and really pushing GitLab to the next kind of thing. How did you think about, you know, the round of financing after that? Was it something that came easy, or was it something you had to think quite a lot about?
Yeah, about YC, one other really useful thing they teach is take one metric. Probably for you, you're going to sell subscriptions, so it should be incremental ACV. And just focus on that, and then don't. If that's not working, like focus all your energy to make that work. That has to work.
Right.
After YC, I had a month scheduled to raise financing, and what they say at YC is it's like a spacecraft coming back from space. With your pricing, you want to make sure you get people interested, and then as they get interested, you can change the trajectory. So we started off raising at, I think, 7 million or something. They were super enthusiastic, so I upped my price, and then did 9 and then 12, and within a week I was at 15 million. The initial 7 million person said no, so it was good that they were so enthusiastic, because I felt encouraged. And then they later they reconsidered, and they ended up investing in 15 million, kind of 2 weeks after they said no to the 7 million. So it's amazing how much of it is a momentum game. I ended up raising the seed round after YC in 2 weeks, but I had a month schedule. So I asked our mentor Kazar, and he said, well, if you have interest in an A, then why not try that? Like, lots of startups die because they can't raise one. So if you can raise one less hurdle. So we ended up raising an A from Korsla Ventures.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And then you said basically that, you know, once you did YC, this is pre going on air, but you said you moved to San Francisco for YC, and then you stayed. Do you think you could have done it outside of San Francisco, or do you think being there has really changed it?
I think it's extremely helpful to be in San Francisco. Also, if you raise money from external people, they will want you there. So I promised I'd be there at least half of my time. Right. And I think they'd be way less likely to invest in you if that weren't the case.
Okay, interesting. I guess the only question I have left is kind of like, how do you think about the long-term trajectory of the company? You know, what's the thing that's driving you now? You know, before it was like, let's build this thing and let's scale it now. I mean, what is it now that drives you?
Yeah, there's one thing. In 2015, me and Dimitri talked, and we said before YC, we said, like, I said to my wife, like, stop me if I want to raise external money, because the expected outcome of your company gets way bigger, but the expected chance of success goes from like 90% to 10%. And as an individual, the expected success is the most important thing. But during YC, we try to hire like great people in sales and marketing, and they wouldn't join unless they would get options. And I saw at other companies what happens if you grant options, but then you don't make it in time. Like 15 years later, the options are still not liquid. That's not the deal they're signing up for. That's not great. And then to grow so that they're worth something in 6 and 7 years, guess what? You need external capital. So I started to understand like the Silicon Valley model. And then we had a talk, me and Dimitri. I want to say a long talk, but it wasn't really a long talk. And Dimitri said, okay, well, I'm committed to this for 10 years. And I started in 2011. So you got my commitment until 2021. And I had to look like, what do what's stimulating me? Is it success? Is it money? Is it expected outcome? And the net present value of the future opportunities? It wasn't that. I want to do interesting things. Before this, I built submarines and things like that.
Oh.
And you know one thing, if you accept external investment, your life's going to get more interesting. You might get your ass fired, but it will be more interesting. So we took the investment and we set a goal of becoming a public company in 2020, because that is fulfilling that obligation you have to people you gave options to. And as a funded company, you have to get to a liquidity event. And either it's going to be an acquisition or become a public company. And to us, public companies seem preferable. And recently we put a date on it. 18 November 2020, we hope to become a public company.
Wow. I mean, that's very specific. Most companies, they kind of hand wave it off. They're like, we're not thinking about this yet. Why so definitive about it?
I think as a CEO, one of my tasks is to set clear goals so that all of our energy can be focused on achieving those goals instead of guessing at what the goals are.
And does that kind of, you can set that goal and that be completely transparent to your company, but what is it that makes you want to be transparent about that with everyone else, with people in general?
Yeah, so we're transparent about this goal. Even the 2015 goal, or the 2020 goal in 2015, we put that on our strategy page. You can Google GitLab strategy. It has full version history. I saw a lot of companies that were hesitant in sharing their strategy, to the point that the people working at the company didn't know the strategy.
Right.
And I think it's also very important that people in our company are aligned to the strategy. Every year, we more than double the company size. So most of the people in the company at the end of the year will be new. And I find it weird to say, oh, join our company, and then we tell you what the strategy is. Because you're signing up for something. I want to know what I'm signing up to. Because that way we get people that are much more aligned to what we do. At least I hope so. I hope if people don't like the strategy, they don't apply. Yeah. And also hope that if they like it, they do apply. Also, at the end of the strategy page is a quote by Peter Drucker, a management thinker, who says, strategy is a commodity, execution is an art. In the end, it's the strategy. Even now that our competitors know what our strategy is, I don't think it matters that much. I don't think it's that actionable. But I do think it matters greatly that people in the company and people we work with understand our strategy.
Yeah. It's very admirable. It's also, quite refreshing to see something like that, where it's just definitively, this is what it is. This is what we're going to execute on. Everyone works towards it.
I love that we touched on our top 3 values: result, iteration, and the third one is transparency.
Very nice. Well, on that point, I guess we should end it there. We really covered all of the topics.
Well, we have 6 values, so we could also talk about diversity, efficiency. Well, efficiency with the bootstrapping, we got a bit into that, and collaboration.
Collaboration. That's an interesting point. On the collaboration part, is that just a case of strategy in terms of this is what the product is supposed to do, or is this in terms of collaboration between team members in the company?
Yeah, between team members in the company and between us and the rest of the community. Let me refer to it. There's a couple of things. There's a lot of kindness. Apart from me, people at the company tend to be very kind at GitLab. We're pretty outspoken about what's not working, but we try to give it directly to the person. We try to not label people. We try to say sorry. I'm a champion in saying sorry. And that's expected of everyone, to acknowledge mistakes. And we're pretty good at blameless problem solving.
Actually, something I was going to say, because if you said, we encourage people to say sorry, but in certain cases, maybe it's not that anyone should really apologize for something, especially in a blameless kind of post-mortem situation for some sort of outage or things like that, right? Because in a lot of those events, even if it's human error, it's the system that was at fault for allowing the human to produce that error. So it's kind of like, it's interesting. I imagine when you say, people should say sorry, it's for things they actually, do wrong from a different standpoint, from a human to human standpoint.
Yeah, for human to human or company, like if you made the wrong judgment call. You mentioned outages. At some point, luckily, a couple of years ago, we had a big 24-hour outage, and it was due to an engineer deleting our production database. And we named team member 1 because we didn't want to attribute it to a person, because it was a publicly visible event. We shared the Google Doc where we were doing it, the postmortem. We even live streamed our efforts to kind of restore the backups and everything else.
Yeah.
And that person chose to out himself, like on social media, like it was me. And 6 months later, he got a promotion, not for deleting the production database, but in the end, he didn't have to say sorry because he was acting according to all our processes and procedures. And obviously the processes and procedures were wrong, but like you don't have to say sorry for a small mistake. And small mistakes can have big consequences if the framework isn't right.
I would say he's probably not the first person to delete a production database.
Nope.
I've done that before, and actually, one of the co-founders of GitHub managed to do that as well back in the day. It's, everyone seems to have done it at some point. And then on the other point, diversity. How do you think about diversity? What does that mean at GitLab?
It means lots of things. I think one of our superpowers is that we can hire across the majority of the world. So we're an all remote company. So naturally we end up with people with diverse backgrounds. Another thing is we don't interview for things like culture fit. Maybe you can say culture fit is values fit. Our values are really important to us, but as long as you sign up to them, you can be a very different personality than everybody else. And I think one of the great things is that we tend to work out in the open, tend to be pretty vocal if something is not great for being an inclusive and diverse company. Interesting.
So you mentioned the kind of remote nature of the company. I spoke with I think I watched one of the co-founders of Hashtag Corp. I think Mitchell was talking about how that can be a difficult thing for people, to be working remotely on their own. Is there anything that you do to kind of encourage, people meet or do things that help them so that they don't end up in that kind of state?
Yeah, for sure. We have 2 meetings every day where everyone is welcome. One is a group conversation where a certain group in the company presents what they've been working on, but the majority of that is Q&A where people ask questions. The other one is our company call, just 5 minutes of announcements and 20 minutes of people talking in smaller groups about their lives outside of work. Other things we do, if we have a travel stipend, so if you want to visit coworkers, you can do that. You can organize meetups. I offer this house when I'm not here for free to people at the company. So they had a Thanksgiving dinner here with some people from the UK, some from the US, but mostly from the Netherlands. And then every 9 months, we bring everyone together for our summit, which is not sitting through presentations, but is all about a big unconference that we organize and doing excursions together at the in the region.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it's pretty amazing. It's amazing to see how far it's come. You know, what I wonder is like, was there any point in time, you know, early on when you kind of looked at it and you just thought like, this is not going to work, like where you just felt like it's not working?
Well, I thought like I'm not going to push it. So we knew it worked for engineering, but then people told us it doesn't work for sales and marketing. So when we, after we got investment, we got an office, and then we're anticipating to build sales and marketing from there. And then people kind of stopped coming to the office because it wasn't needed. So I now think that people come to the office not because they like commuting, but because otherwise they're missing out on essential information and career opportunities. So we just push very, very hard to make sure that people get the information. We communicate a lot more formally, officially, or not back channeling. We just communicate more as a company to the official channels than most other companies. Like when we're fundraising, there's a fundraising Slack channel, and you can see a play-by-play of what's happening. You don't have to ask the founder when they come into the office or stuff like that. And you can make accommodations. We have the concept of virtual coffee breaks where you plan 25 minutes with someone without an agenda. You can just hang out together.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, I think when you brought up sales, you know, sales and marketing, that kind of brought an interesting question for me, which is, you know, how do you think about sales? Like, what is that sales process, you know, for you guys? What does a salesperson look like? Is it, you know, classic enterprise sales? Is it inside sales? Is it sales engineering?
Yeah, it's everything. We have a hybrid sales model. We have those different tiers. We also have a different kind of purchasing motions. They're self-serve, and that's done. There's some customer advocates that help out there with questions. There's mid-market with an account manager. And then most of our business is strategic. So more than 2,000 people at the company. They have classic enterprise salespeople. Right. Make $250,000 on target earnings.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. Said this answers quite a lot of my questions.
Yeah. Also, if you want to know more, like how do we do sales, it won't surprise you that that's all public, and you can Google GitLab Sales Handbook, and you'll find a lot of information how we structure all of that.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to spend a lot more time reading up on, you know, your strategy and the path that you took. I think a lot of it is a lesson for me, you know, and useful for me in what I'm doing. And hopefully I can learn, you know, quite a bit from what you guys are doing. Appreciate you taking the time once again.
Yeah, can you tell me a bit more about what you're doing? Because I don't quite understand it. And I think of myself as pretty knowledgeable about the latest state in cloud native world. But I looked into micro, it seemed like an application framework a bit. But what kind of niche does it, or maybe it's not a niche, maybe everyone needs it, but where does it fit? How would it compare? What would the alternatives be?
It basically fits into the model of building microservice applications. So the idea of, you know, going from a monolithic application to many small applications that communicate over the network. And it's primarily for engineers who write programs in Go. And it was built on the premise of every organization, every company, when it hits a point in scale, both technically and organizationally, ends up having to re-platform or break down their monolithic applications into service-oriented architecture or microservices. And it's just a pattern that emerges with basically every company who hits a level of scale, because their teams must now operate independently, ship features independently, maybe even build independent products. And to do that, on a monolithic platform and a monolithic code base becomes quite problematic after you hit, I don't know, 50 engineers, 100 engineers, 10 teams, all independently trying to do things. So, everyone, pre 2015, 2016, everyone was building custom in-house frameworks and platforms to do this. And when I did this, and so I saw what, I worked at Google, so I saw what Google's technology looked like. I worked at a company called Halo, where we actually replatformed and built this stuff internally. The company was a competitor to Uber a few years back, and what I realized was there was a need for this product in the world. Everyone kept building a custom version of this within their company, and there was nothing open source. And so I was set out to build an open source version of that, but fully knowing that my goal was to build a company around it. I felt like there could be initially in 2014, I felt there could be a platform as a service company. As time went on, we saw the emergence of Docker, Kubernetes, gRPC, and Envoy and other technologies, which, and then, more managed cloud solutions like managed Kubernetes and things like that, which made it clear that platform as a service was not a model that would work in the next 4 or 5 years, because all companies just wanted to run directly on their cloud providers, and then they wanted to use all of these, technologies. But one of the problems that didn't go away was, building microservices applications was still complex, still quite difficult, and the tools that I built kind of helped simplify that. And so my goal around that now is, I've built those tools to help simplify that experience, but now, to actually make that sustainable and something that can scale, it needs to be a real business, and it needs to cater to companies who are, willing to pay for a product for features that get them to production. And those are classic features that you would see in most products that are open core, which is, authentication, security, observability, management, all these kinds of things. And so, working on that, and I imagine, just as GitLab has probably evolved over the last 5 years, the tools that I have written and am writing will also evolve. I imagine the way in which we write software will probably change as well.
Yeah, is it what Rails is for Ruby web apps, you aim to be for Go microservices?
Yeah, basically. And there was, Ruby had Rails, Java has Spring, Go doesn't really have a framework. And I think, in today's world, we're all building cloud native applications. Most of those technologies are written in Go. And I think Go requires a framework to write applications that are distributed, microservices based. But you can't, as a business, nobody has ever been able to monetize an application framework. It is merely a distribution mechanism for something else, right? It's kind of like a marketing tool where it's the starting point for developers and they write software with that, but you still have to sell them. You still have to sell teams and companies some sort of platform. You have to look at it from the same standpoint as you do with GitLab, which is, the open source version, the free version is great for individuals. And then the thing that people pay for is for teams. And that's more like, I have certain requirements to go to production. And that's where I think my focus will go as well.
Yeah, I think Spring is the best example. And what Spring did is they got popular and they got bought by Pivotal, I think. And
yeah,
Pivotal is selling tools, of which Spring is a big part. So yeah, I think it will be hard to sell it as it's hard to sell the framework. And then the tooling, I'm looking at your pricing page. I think a lot of the tooling you make is either going to be native it's either going to be part of the cloud native stack, like circuit breaking, smart routing, rate limiting. That's just screaming Envoy and Istio.
Yeah.
And observability, real-time metrics. So I can go on, but we both know that.
The interesting point for me is, everything I'm doing is based on the feedback loop that I have, as opposed to the things people are telling me, or, what it's sort of counter to the obvious. So the obvious point of view is all of these things will be open source and packaged into the infrastructure and be commoditized and whatnot. And the flip side to that argument is the tooling that is being created is actually incredibly complex and difficult for small teams to run and manage. And they're looking for something that is drop-in, simple, and caters to their needs, which they can understand. And so it's almost like there's a market, there's an audience that I'm able to cater to that is quite contrary to everything else that's happening. And so I'm just serving the feedback loop that I'm getting, right? Which is like, I talk to all these companies and they just say, I ask them, like, they use this framework. They say, we tried these other frameworks, they're very complex. We came to use this one solved our problems. Then they say, we want to incorporate multiple languages. And then I ask them, why are you not using Envoy and Linkerd and gRPC and all this kind of stuff and Kubernetes? And they're like, well, we don't understand how to use it, and then I'm like, and they say, we would prefer if you would build the thing that would solve this problem for us, because we trust the opinions provided by your tooling. So it's just a case of, if you provide opinions and you do things one way and they're simpler, you'll find an audience and actually people who are willing to pay for a product. And maybe in the long term, some of these things get commoditized and we standardize, but that's why you just continue to move up the stack and, determine what your value line is, what outcomes you're looking to help people achieve. And so, I mean, today, this is the product that I want to build and sell. In 2 or 3 years, it's likely something entirely different, something that has evolved beyond that, where maybe a lot of these features actually move into the open source and we're monetizing other features.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think GitLab is in that business. Like, we see that people want to use Kubernetes and Prometheus and Jaeger and the service meshes, but it's hard to configure it all. So they are really glad if there's a convention over configuration framework, and GitLab is that. They can just put up a Kubernetes cluster somewhere, attach it to GitLab, and GitLab knows what to do, knows how to do CI, CD, running your app. And then from there on, you can customize it further. So I do think people want to be based on the standards, so they want to know that they're not locked in. There will never be another Heroku, because Heroku, when you're done with Heroku and when it's too expensive, you have to retool completely. That doesn't make sense. So the next Heroku, there won't be a next Heroku like there won't be a next Red Hat, but people do want something that's just for a simple use case, it's simple to operate.
Yeah.
And right now that isn't the case. And they're not going to pay Jaeger and Prometheus and everyone else money. Now, well, first of all, Jaeger and Prometheus they actively are against a single commercial vendor being in control there. But there is going to be room for someone who packages that up. And I think a natural place for that is what we're doing with GitLab. So I think we're very aligned in that vision, and I think you're spot on there. That there's room there.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's end the broadcast as this. If you've been watching, thanks for watching.
Thanks very much.